My stepsister, Brianna, didn't scream. She just stood there in the middle of the luxuriously lit living room, looking at me with a look of pure, disgusting smugness. She uttered 3 words that felt like a death sentence. "You're so toxic. Get out." The room fell deathly silent. My mother, Margaret, avoided my eyes, pretending to be busy with a lace tablecloth. My stepfather, Harold, just stood there like a statue, not saying a single word to defend his own daughter who was being insulted. So, I did the one thing they didn't expect. I stood up, grabbed my bag, and walked out without a fight. I didn't make excuses. I didn't beg. I just left quietly, leaving them to their petty victory. But that was 7 days ago. Now, my phone won't stop buzzing. Brianna's voice over the speaker sounds frantic, her breath hitching as if the air in that apartment had just been sucked out. "Why did I get an eviction notice? Evelyn, are you insane?" That's when it hit her. Toxic people don't let their siblings live rent-free in their property forever. Before I explain how we got to that cold eviction notice, hit like and comment where you're listening from, especially if setting boundaries ever made you the villain in your family. My name is Evelyn. I'm 35, and I'm a dentist. On most days, my life looks perfect and peaceful behind my crisp white coat, in clinics that smell like disinfectant and the steady hum of machines. People say I'm successful and calm. But the price of that calmness was learning how to swallow bitterness for years without making a sound. My white coat isn't just a uniform, it's armor. In my downtown dental clinic, everything is under total control. The cold LED lights, the high-pitched whistle of the drill, and precision down to the millimeter. Patients see Dr. Evelyn Vance, a successful woman who handles complex surgeries with hands that never shake. But they don't know that to build that composure, I had to learn to bury every bit of discomfort deep in my chest. I turned silence into an art form, and unfortunately, my family was the audience that enjoyed it the most. My world started to crack after my father passed away. That loss felt like furniture being moved around in the dark. You don't notice anything until you trip. My mother, Margaret, remarried Harold, and Brianna entered my life like a ghost of constant demands. In that so-called perfect family, I was quickly pigeonholed into a role, the responsible kid who never needed help. I put myself through school, built my career, and paid my own bills. Independence wasn't a choice. It was a survival instinct once I realized I was an outsider in my own home. The only person who truly saw me was my grandmother. Her Boston apartment wasn't fancy, but it smelled like old books and felt peaceful. When she passed, she left that apartment to me, not as a prize, but as a trust. She believed I would take care of it, but when Brianna started spiraling into debt with hollow dreams and a bank account full of nothing, my mother showed up with the ultimate weapon, guilt. "It's just temporary, Evelyn. Family helps family, right?" she said in a soft but pressuring voice. I nodded, agreeing to let her stay there without paying a dime in rent. I didn't know then that my kindness would be the most expensive mistake of my life. Kindness is often mistaken for weakness, and I let that confusion go on for way too long. That temporary 6 months quickly turned into a year, then 2. Brianna never mentioned moving out. Instead, any conversation about a timeline became as blurry as the fog over the Boston harbor. Her texts started to change. They weren't requests anymore. They were orders disguised as maintenance. "The dishwasher is too loud. You should get a new one." Or, "I think this place needs a more neutral color to fit my energy." No, please, no question marks. Just pure entitlement. Every time I stopped by, my heart sank. The apartment that used to be my grandmother's sanctuary, smelling of Earl Grey tea, was now buried under Brianna's mess. Cheap perfume and fast food smells clung to the walls I used to cherish. There were stains on the carpet and scratches on the precious oak floors my grandmother had kept perfect for half a century. Brianna looked at me like I was an uninvited guest in my own property. "Are you here for something?" "I'm busy with some big projects," she'd say, while scrolling through social media on my favorite velvet armchair. Meanwhile, I was still quietly paying for everything. Property taxes, insurance, building fees. Every month, thousands of dollars drained from my account to maintain the comfort of someone who didn't even bother to dust my grandmother's photos. My mother and Harold would call to check in, But really, it was just to inject more guilt. Brianna is in a sensitive place. Don't pressure her, Evelyn. I began to realize the ugly truth. My silence wasn't bringing peace. It was just creating infinite convenience for greedy people. The price of this silence was becoming too high. That dinner wasn't a family gathering. It was a carefully staged execution wrapped in fake hospitality. My mother called me with her sweetest voice, swearing it was just a normal meal to reconnect. But the moment I stepped into my childhood home, the smell of grilled steak mixed with the expensive perfume of strangers made my skin crawl. 4 strangers were sitting at the table, the family of Brianna's fiancé, the Millers. I stood there, still in my work clothes after a long day at the clinic, feeling like an outsider dragged into a well-rehearsed play. The sound of silverware hitting porcelain was sharp and dry, like the ticking of a time bomb. Throughout the meal, they showered me with fake praise about being a top dentist. I stayed quiet, watching Brianna glance at my mother as if waiting for a signal to start. Then, the bomb dropped. Brianna set her wine glass down, smiling brightly but with eyes as cold as ice. She started a presentation about her dream wedding at a luxury resort in Rhode Island with numbers that were insane. $80,000 for the venue, $20,000 for flowers, and other endless expenses. When she turned to me, that smile became a forced expectation. "Evelyn is doing so well, right, Mom?" Brianna said, her voice an excited pitch higher. Harold nodded in approval, while my mother grabbed my hand, a touch that gave me chills. They didn't invite me for dinner. They invited my checkbook. I looked around the table, saw the greedy eyes of the Millers on me, and I realized that in their eyes, I wasn't a sister. I was a blank check. "I'm sorry, Brianna. I can give you a small gift, but I'm not paying for a $100,000 wedding." My words hit the table like a rock thrown into a still pond. The silence that followed was so thick I could hear the hum of the fridge in the next room. Brianna didn't cry or argue with logic. She just leaned back, crossed her arms, and let out a dry, mocking laugh. "You're being so toxic, Evelyn," she said. That word hit the table like a lead weight. It wasn't a description. It was a weapon chosen to paralyze me. Around the table, the Millers started whispering, but not one person defended me. Harold cleared his throat, his face turning red with anger. "Evelyn, be reasonable. This family has always supported you. Family shouldn't count every penny when it comes to a once-in-a-lifetime event." I looked at him, then at my mother. Margaret just stared into her wine glass. Her silence was a deafening endorsement of her stepdaughter's insult. In that moment, the contrast was blinding. I was the reliable daughter until I said no. As soon as I stopped being a source of money, I immediately became the villain. "Toxic," I repeated. The word tasted like rust in my mouth. Is it toxic that I'm the one paying the mortgage? Is it toxic that I want respect for the property I worked my life for? Brianna rolled her eyes, a gesture of unearned entitlement that made me sick. "Success has made you cold, Evelyn. You've forgotten where you came from." The irony was suffocating. I knew exactly where I came from, a childhood of being ignored. Now, I was finally being seen, but only as a target. I realized they didn't care about my life. They only cared about my convenience. As I looked at those faces, the last string holding me to them snapped. I wasn't angry. I was terrifyingly clear-headed. I didn't sleep a wink that night, but it wasn't because of anger. Anger is a cheap, wasteful emotion. Instead, I lay in the dark, letting that word toxic spin in my mind until it washed away every last bit of guilt. When the sun rose over the gray Boston sky, I was a different person. Clarity usually comes after a painful slap, and Brianna's slap helped me see through the play where I'd been playing the sponsor for years. I was no longer a nice dentist. I was a property owner taking back my rights. The next morning, I drove to the office of Mr. Sterling, a real estate lawyer with the cold precision of a scalpel. We sat in a minimalist room where the sun hit the mahogany desk. I didn't exaggerate or talk about my feelings. I just gave him the facts. A list of payments I had covered for Brianna. Utilities, maintenance, repairs for her neglect. It totaled tens of thousands of dollars, a high price for fake harmony. Sterling nodded, his face expressionless. "Legally, there is no lease. You are the sole owner. Eviction is your right." Those words solidified my resolve. When I left the office, I sat in my car, hands gripping the cold steering wheel. I remembered my grandmother's words. Kindness should never be traded for self-respect. I didn't call my mother or text Harold to explain. I quietly moved forward with the legal steps. When I dropped the official eviction notice into the certified mail slot, the sound of the metal door slamming shut felt like a hammer nailing a coffin shut on this relationship. I didn't feel like I had won. I just felt stable. The storm was coming, and this time, I was the one controlling it. 3 days passed in a scary silence, the kind of silence they usually use to punish me when I didn't do what they wanted. But this time, I was the one in the driver's seat. I was sitting in my apartment, sipping a cold bourbon after a long day at the clinic, where I had just pulled out some decayed teeth, a perfect metaphor for what I was doing with my family. My phone on the marble table suddenly started vibrating violently. Brianna's name lit up the screen. I didn't pick up right away. I let it ring until the very last second, letting her anxiety turn into desperation with every buzz. When I finally hit answer, there was no hello. Why did I get an eviction notice? Evelyn, have you lost your mind? Brianna's voice didn't have that sharp, smug tone from dinner. It was thin, shaky, and full of a panic she couldn't hide. In the background, I could hear my mother screeching and Harold slamming a table, shouting something about rights. Suddenly, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was the center of the universe, but not the way they wanted. There's no mistake, Brianna, I said, my voice as flat as a frozen lake. The living arrangement was temporary. And that time is up. She screamed into the phone, calling me a coward for acting behind the family's back. I almost let out a cold laugh. I thought about how they had staged that dinner to ambush my finances without warning. I didn't do this behind your back, I continued. I just did it without a useless argument. There's a difference. My mother grabbed the phone, her voice thick with fake tears. You're overreacting, Evelyn. You're just being emotional right now. Emotional, another label to diminish my value, to make me look out of control. But they were wrong. I wasn't emotional. I was doing a fair calculation. I traded kindness for their housing for years, and all I got back was the toxic label. So, let this toxic person play the part perfectly. 2 days later, their shadows stretched across the door of my luxury apartment. Through the peephole, I watched the power trio of my family huddling in the Boston cold. Brianna stood closest, her arms wrapped tight as if trying to hold on to her last bit of pride. Margaret was behind her, eyes already welling up with tears, her go-to weapon for manipulation. Harold just stared into space, looking like someone forced to participate in a failed robbery. I didn't open the door immediately. I stood there in the hallway shadows, enjoying the feeling of finally looking at them from a position of power. When I opened the door, the foul air of desperation rushed in. Brianna didn't waste a second. You're embarrassing us, she hissed. Do you know how this looks to the Millers? The wedding is only months away. I looked at the familiar face I had tolerated for years, and suddenly, it looked disgustingly foreign. This wasn't a fear of losing a home. It was a fear of losing access to my bank account. You told me to get out, I said, my voice dry like footsteps on snow. And I did exactly that. I didn't mean it, she shouted. You knew I was just being emotional. No, I interrupted. You were just being too comfortable. There's a huge difference. Harold cleared his throat, trying to use a practical tone to suppress me. Evelyn, you don't need that apartment. You're living well. Why make things harder than they need to be? That was the final straw. It confirmed that in their eyes, my success was public property, but their struggles were my private responsibility. This isn't about need, I said, looking Harold dead in the eye. This is about ownership and respect. Brianna scoffed, a sound full of venom. You really are toxic. You're punishing your family over one comment. I didn't dodge the label anymore. I wore it like a badge of honor. Toxic people, I said slowly, don't let their sister live rent-free in their apartment for 2 years. I'm done being nice, Brianna. I'm starting to have boundaries. Her face went white when she realized her old script didn't work on me anymore. The final day arrived, bringing the gray chill of a Boston winter, an atmosphere that matched the emptiness in my heart perfectly. I didn't step foot in the apartment while they were packing. I didn't want the smell of their desperation and resentment on my skin ever again. Instead, I sat in my SUV across the street, engine idling, the heater blowing dry air, as cold and clinical as my dental office. I watched them through the windshield, like a biologist watching a parasite being removed from its host. Brianna looked small and unusually messy. The smugness that used to make her stand tall had completely collapsed under the weight of reality. She moved between cardboard boxes, with the face of someone betrayed. The ghost of the person who called me toxic was now just a shaking figure. My mother, Margaret, moved slowly with a dramatic sadness, glancing at my car with every step, hoping I'd roll down the window and say, "Stop, come back inside." But I stayed silent, my eyes cold behind my sunglasses. My silence was a steel wall that no crocodile tears could pierce. When the last box was shoved into the rental truck, Brianna walked toward my car. The sound of her high heels clicking on the asphalt was a dry, lonely rhythm, a reminder of the luxuries she spent my hard-earned money on. She placed the set of keys on the hood of my car. The sound of metal hitting the paint was sharp and cold, like a prison door slamming shut. She didn't look at me. She couldn't. The balance of power had shifted so fast she had no ground left to stand on. As their truck disappeared around the corner, I walked into the apartment. It looked like a battlefield of neglect. Deep scratches on the oak floors, broken kitchen hinges, and the smell of stale fast food clinging to the curtains. It was the physical version of their presence in my life. They came, they took, they broke things, and they left when there was nothing left to exploit. But as I stood in the living room, where the afternoon sun hit the spot my grandmother loved, I knew I'd be okay. I was going to scrub this toxicity away, inch by inch, until no trace of them remained in my world. The apartment is quiet now, not the suffocating, resentful silence I endured for 2 years, but the pure stillness of a lake after a storm. I walked through every room, personally sweeping away the last remains of their presence. I hired painters to redo every wall, a crisp, cold white that felt like a brainwash for the space. The scratches on the floor were buffed out, the broken hinges replaced. In less than a month, the apartment had new tenants, a young couple of finance professionals, polite and professional. The first rent payment popped up on my phone notification right on time, transparent and free of any emotional demands. My family hasn't reached out. Their silence is no longer a psychological punishment. It's the most valuable gift they've ever given me. I realized I didn't lose my family that day. I only lost a toxic illusion. That love requires self-destruction. I spent my life playing the responsible one, only to realize I was feeding monsters with my own misplaced kindness. The most expensive lesson I learned from this wreckage is this. When you stop being useful, people who live on entitlement will use moral judgments to attack you. Toxic, selfish, cold-blooded. Those words aren't actually a diagnosis of your character. They are the weak protests of a predator when the prey decides to build steel boundaries. I didn't destroy my family. I just stepped out of a role that was slowly killing my soul. My life is quieter and more honest than ever. If my story sounds heartbreakingly familiar, remember that boundaries aren't cruel. They are self-preservation. Share your story in the comments below. What boundary changed your life? And if you want to hear more stories of family betrayal and quiet, proud revenge, hit subscribe. I'm Evelyn, and this is my new dawn,